As is so common with the Mega Man series, I find myself thinking, oh, that was awesome! Oh, that was frustrating. Right? Like, that's very common, especially in the later Mega Man games. Because what we have with ZX is them moving forward a bit. We are on the DS now, so we can do a lot more with it. The sprite work is just absolutely gorgeous in this game, and they do so much with the backgrounds, including the weird heart-pumping power station, but let's just ignore that for a moment. The level design itself is fantastic. Not quite as good as some of the previous Mega Mans, but still very good. We've got the different forms, which allows you to actually... It's such a logical iteration on the Mega Man concept, which goes all the way back to Mega Man 1, where you gain the power of the boss and you use it against them. You know, the Kirby concept. Except this time we actually gain some of the abilities of the bosses, not just their attacks. So, you know, we gain the ability to do the air dash or float with Harpuya, or we gain the ability to... go very fast or shoot things or hang from things as Phantom and so forth and so on. It's a great iteration on that concept, and honestly, it's the kind of thing I've been hoping for a long time. It was one of the things I was actually hopeful about from Mighty Number 9, which fell through the cracks, obviously. So cool, you know, I'm with it. It's a great idea. The bosses are fun. You know, most of the bosses are okay, but there's still a few that really jump out, like the giant rhino guy, whose weak point is half his body. Oh yeah, speaking of which, the weak point system, this is great too. I actually like this, as weird as this may sound. So, in Mega Man ZX, the way this works is each of the boss has a weak point. Where that weak point is varies, but it's usually the part that's the easiest to hit. So it's easiest to hit the boss in their weak point. Now that can drag the difficulty down, but that's on purpose, because if you hit them at all, you lower your ranking of how you defeat them. The idea being that the more damage you do to their weak point, the more damage you're doing to the biometal which you're pulling out of them, and thus the biometal itself is lower level. Now, you can actually replace that later with energy crystals, which you get for doing missions or just running around gathering stuff. So you can still just kill a boss by killing its weakness and raise its energy level. You can also just ignore the energy levels because that just affects weapon power-ups, nothing else really. Or you can try to challenge yourself to fight the boss in what is effectively hard mode. And I've talked so many times about how much I love this approach to difficulty. Yoshi's Island is the example I tend to use, but another one is World of Warcraft. When you do an achievement on a specific boss from about Wrath and onwards, there's a thing where it's like, okay, you're doing this boss, but you're doing this other thing to make the boss artificial. But you are choosing to fight the boss in another manner, which makes the fight harder. Which is fun, if you want to, and optional if you don't. I love that system, and I want to give special praise to that. The town, there's an actual honest-to-goodness town in this game, where you just go around and talk to NPCs, and it adds... I've never realized before how much I wanted something like this in a Mega Man game until I had it. Having that kind of safe space, return to base kind of thing, other than, I know they've always had the resistance camp. I mean, like an honest to goodness, this is where the NPCs live. This is where the civilians are. This is where we get perspectives on what's going on and how they think of things and blah, blah, blah. You know, there's just, it adds a grounded layer to the atmosphere, which really improved the game's overall approach for me in several ways. And of course, this is part of the new approach to level design. This is something kind of hallmarking back to 0-1, where the majority of the levels are actually interconnected. Actually, all of them are in this case. So if you were to zoom the camera out, you would see one giant map because every level is just physically connected to each other. And that's kind of a cool concept for several reasons. It's cool for the same Zelda thing that I mentioned. Some people are saying, wasn't that a Metroidvania thing? No, this is not a Metroidvania. Any more than Zelda is a Metroidvania. Interconnected levels is fine, but that doesn't... Just because you have one large map, it doesn't suddenly make it a Metroidvania. There's other aspects of game design that go into that, which we will talk about more in the next game. But... as much as I love this game and praise it on several levels, and it's got convenience features, and it's got the quick swap between the forms, and the forms are awesome, and the power-ups are awesome, the bosses are awesome, the stages are awesome, that interconnected world sucks. Oh my god. So, there's several problems with it, and all of them just kind of combine. It's technically one problem, but that one problem is consistent of several different parts. This is the durability thing from Breath of the Wild all over again. In the off chance you never heard me talk about that, the fact that there's durability in Breath of the Wild isn't the problem. It's 5 or 6 interconnected mechanics that make that so terrible, right? Same thing here. So the map is useless. That's the first problem. You open the map and you see a zone which has a line connecting to another zone, and that's it. Vague inferences of where things connect, and that's about all you got. The second problem is that there's very, very few fast travel points. So zipping around the map, well, you can't. In order to get around, you have to just walk there, which is a problem for the third reason, because there's not a lot of good traversal mechanics. And the off chance you've never heard me talk about that before, because it doesn't often come up in game design, traversal mechanics is exactly what it sounds like. It's getting from point A to point B. A good game will make that fun. It'll either give you tools or make it part of the gameplay or something to make it interesting or engaging. My two favorite examples of that are Shadow of War and Spider-Man on the PS4, both of which it's just enjoyable to go from point A to point B. Arguably Grand Theft Auto 5 as well, with the way that the cars handle there and the way the terrain is designed to give you options for getting from point A to point B. Stuff like that. A game with a game with no traversal mechanics is this one. There's no real traversal mechanics. There's just going through the stages, and that sucks. A game with bad traversal mechanics, well, that's a different thing, and we'll talk about that at some other point if we ever review like some of the open world games that were coming out in the PS3 era. So you get the overall point. So, okay, bad map. All right, that's the problem. Very few fast travel points, so you are effectively walking everywhere. No actual traversal mechanics, so there's nothing that makes it interesting or fun to get from point A to point B. And no recall. There's no way to just kind of pull yourself back to base hit the teleport or the escape button or whatever you want to call it, right? All of these things kind of combine to make this whole thing, just getting around, a mess. But hang on, I'm not done, because the biggest flaw of this game by far is a pretty common flaw in games in general. Walkthrough-itis. Good luck figuring out where to go or what to do without having a guide, is what that boils down to. There's not really anything in the game that indicates it other than a vague, go north. And that's the direction you get. You go to Area L in this game is the direction you get. Where the hell is Area L? How the hell do I get to Area L? Now, I did actually have people helping me out, and I had to look up a walkthrough a few times. But it gets even worse than that, because there's side quests in this game. No, seriously, check this out. Now, the side quests themselves are kind of fun, and they give you the optional chips and the optional items and all sorts of stuff. So they're valuable and worth doing, except for the fact that they suck unless you have a walkthrough. Because, like, for example, find my mushroom. They're in Sector A. Okay, well, you do that. No, mushroom's the name of my bird. Okay, so you go back to Sector A, and unless you're paying extremely close attention, you never notice that there's this one tiny bird, and it's very small, it's like 4 pixels tall, that just zips by the screen in this one section of one of the areas that is Area A. Right. Here's another personal favorite. After doing the hide-and-seek side quest, and you turn it in, you get everything cool, nothing tells you that the quest isn't done. If, on the off chance you happen to go through town and look for a specific NPC while being in the correct form, that is to say, not human form, then you will be able to turn it in and get the actual reward from the quest, which is the chip, the frog chip, I think. So it's the one that lets you slide down walls. Now, you could say that's optional, but as I've said so many times, something being optional does not mean it's immune to criticism. That's not how that works. Something being optional can mitigate criticism, because if it was mandatory, this would be worse. Oh, but it is mandatory, because again, just getting to the missions is a pain. Oh, hang on. It gets even worse. I'm not done yet, because check this out. We actually did this on camera, completely on accident. I was just naturally exploring, and I found a whole new stage, and I was like, oh, cool. And I was really liking the stage. It's actually probably my favorite stage in the whole game. And then I got to the very end of the stage and found a boss door, which I couldn't open because I hadn't unlocked the mission. It's a mission trigger. Remember, there's no recall, so I can't just leave. And there's no fast travel, and there's no traversal mechanics. So I had to go through what is effectively a whole stage of Mega Man, and then go back through in reverse in order to get the mission, which is the first thing I did, and then come back and go through the stage a third time. What? So you could see, and forgive me for haranguing on this point, this is the big flaw of this game. There's other small issues. They do boss refights as usual. There's a little beep noise whenever you're turning in a mission. But this whole issue, this interconnected issue of these 5 or 6 mechanics, is the big flaw of this game, and is what really dragged its score down. This would have been a massively more positive game if not for that. We'll see if we think of that in ZX2. But as usual, it's time to talk about the narrative. Let me go ahead and admit something to you. I said this on camera, too, on stream. I had the vaguest memories of ZX1. In fact, I had this really bad problem where I kept thinking of things that are actually in the second game, which stuck out in my memory much more, and assuming they were in the first game, which they're not. I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. And this actually happened on camera unintentionally. I was like, oh, such and such is the thing, right? Someone was like, no, that's in the second game. Oh. This game wasn't very memorable to me, and I could see why on the narrative axis, because they don't discuss what's going on. They don't discuss why is going on. This is, in many ways, 0-1 again. It's a prologue. I'm saying that wrong. It's more like 0-2, but worse. Because all of this is set up for ZX2. All of this is trying to set the stage for what's about to happen. There's tons of foreshadowing all over the place. They directly reference a certain character I'm not going to name right now from ZX2. And they talk a lot about the past and history and all that stuff. But at the same time, it's all just bits and pieces. It's chapter 1. So it's understandable that the narrative is a little bit weak, but still solid. They do actually do several things right in the narrative, and I do like the unintentional world building. Let me point out 2 examples of unintentional world building. I say unintentional, I shouldn't say that. I'm not sure if it's intentional or not, but one of the things we see in this game is foliage. Not cybernetic foliage, honest to goodness plants. This, of course, follows through on the events of 0-4, where we had that arcology and the terraforming unit, which was helping to regrow the thing. And we do know that this entire city is centered around Area 0. Slither Inc. is like built on Area 0, right? So we've got this whole section, and we've got the terrain actually starting to recover in a natural format. We've also got cats. Not robotic cats. Cats. And again, that sounds like what's so substantial about that? When was the last time we had a Mega Man game where normal animals existed in the setting? The mere idea that species has been able to actually exist and survive in a domesticated format says volumes about the entire setting. As I've talked about before, the Z series is a post-apocalypse, but the ZX series is post-apocalypse. We've actually started recovering. We actually have civilization. Like I said, there's a town. There's just a town where people hang out and talk, and it's normal, and they have an everyday life. There's this one woman who's really worried about her parents because she wants to be with her boyfriend, but her parents don't approve of him, and so she's trying to figure out how to deal with that. And I'm not even going to go into it. It's actually surprisingly nuanced. Like, she understands that they mean well, and she doesn't want to be too dismissive of them, but at the same time, she hasn't changed her mind. She really does love this guy, and she wants to be with him, and I don't know. And she just talks about this story as you go throughout the game every time you chat with her. I chatted with her several times just to keep getting those little story tidbits. There's all this normalcy about it, which works quite well. And then there's the Mavericks. One of the things, this is almost assuredly not intentional world building. But one of the things several people mention is, oh yeah, by the way, if any of the Serpent Inc. people see you with a weapon, they'll shoot you on sight without question. Now, on the one hand, that makes sense. In many ways, real life kind of follows that. No controversial. It's just, there's a logic to that, right? If someone's walking around with a gun out and open, then that's probably a threat that probably needs to be dealt with. But the other point of this is that everyone treats this as completely normal, because most of these people have grown up under a situation where Mavericks are normal, and so is Slither Inc. and the security forces that deal with them. Now, you're probably thinking, wait, Mavericks? Yeah, although honestly, I guess at this point we should call them Wavericks, because all of the Mavericks in this game are a direct response to the Model W virus. And let's go ahead and address the big skeleton in the room, which is right over there for some reason. Why are you looking at me? I mentioned this briefly before, did X survive? Did Zero survive? Did Vile survive? Did all of the Guardians survive? Now, I've done a little bit more behind-the-scenes research. Whether this counts or not is up to you, death of the author, yada yada. But the intent is clear that no. Vile is dead, X is dead, or in the afterlife. Zero is dead, the Guardians are dead. They're dead, they're gone. There's several bits of evidence for this, but the behind-the-scenes thing is that the original narrative didn't even have the models actually having dialogue at all. That was only added at the insistence of the sound director, who was wanting to experiment with some voice acting, which we will see in the next game. So they didn't actually talk at all in the original scripting design. Now, again, how much that matters is up to you, but the strongest pieces of evidence are just the game itself. These people do not act like their previous selves, and Model W doesn't talk at all. Instead, what we see is kind of a logical consequence of what's happening here, right? So Seal flat out admits that she created the other biometals based off of the original Model W, and she did so using data about the previous heroes. In short, this is just a copy X situation. I say just, it's not a bad thing, because it means that these are different people, and in many ways they are much less violent and horrible and stupid, too. X actually has some legitimately great lines in this game. Model X has some great lines. Model Z has some great lines. And there's this bit where Model F, I keep screwing that up. I myself don't think it's Fafnir. Model F, who is based on Fafnir, acts in a way that Fafnir never would, right? And that's good, because he's not Fafnir. He's his own person, his own identity. However, that is just my presumption, and I will admit that you could make the argument that it's still them. I just hate that idea. Especially because of Model W, which we know was made by, spoilers. We'll discuss that more in the next game, but that's the other interesting thing about this. The way that this kind of works for me is that this is actually a pretty logical consequence of the events of 04. This is in every way a true sequel. The events of Z4 directly lead to the events of ZX. What happened at the end of C4, if you remember, is that Dr. Vile, who was already in a suit that was built for him, that was regenerating his body and replacing bits of him with metallic parts and cybernetic parts, right? Like there's a bit where you can literally see that a chunk of his face is gone, and you could see what should have been his skull, and instead all you see is just a bunch of robot parts around his eye and around his face, right? He is, at that point, already kind of a biometal. Then he merges with Ragnarok directly to fight us in the final battle, and then dies in the impact. Years later, spoiler, finds this and decides to try and use it, for whatever reason, we'll talk about that next game, in order to set up his whole thing about evolution and merging humans and Reploids, which is exactly what Dr. Vile effectively was, the merger of human and Reploid. Right? So thus we have biometal. The very term makes sense. I forget what it was called in Japanese. Cyrek actually told me, and I can't remember the name. I apologize. But it's a cool concept in its own right, and it makes perfect sense that Vile would be the originator of this. And because it's based on Dr. Vile, it's horrible and evil and wrong, because it still has all of the issues that would go into that, since it's based off his data directly. So Seal makes the counterparts, X, Z, H, F, L, and P, I think is the full list. There's actually a couple others. And it sets this up as like, here, okay, we're going to use these in order to help protect this from the future. And then we have the whole Mega Man game, which is hinted at several times, because all of the Mega Men are the people who are genetically predisposed to be capable of merging with biometal and using it in order to take over the world or conquer it, whatever. Which is hinted at several times in this game, and that's actually what Serpent was doing, too. And you'll notice I haven't even mentioned Serpent. That's because he's a nobody. Even though he's the main villain of this game, he is ultimately just the dude who happened to be on part of the original Model W research team, and then he got taken over by Model W in some way or another, and then either completely went mad with the power or was actually usurped and replaced by Vile, whichever theory you prefer. And then he just starts doing evil things and evil stuff and killing people and being evil. It's very generic. And that leads us to the end of the game. And I do love the idea of the merger of the two. But one of the things, speaking of the merger of the two, even though that's a major theme, I mean, one of the key thematic points to the beginning of the game is 0 and X merge into ZX. I mean, think about that for a moment. The ultimate product of, the currently standing ultimate product of both Dr. Wily and Dr. Light merging into one. Just think about it for a second. The ultimate theme is that merger thing, and yet they don't discuss what humanoids are at all in this game, which really surprised me, since it's such a big setting point. As a consequence, we will not be discussing that this game. I sure hope they bring it up in the next game, because the whole humanoid thing is pretty important and kind of a big setting point, and I'm surprised they didn't even mention it in this one. They did try to still distinguish between humans and not humans, and I'm pretty sure that Ale and Ash, or whatever his name is, the guy, we didn't play Guy, we played Ale, is human. But the distinction doesn't matter as much as it used to, which we will, of course, discuss next time. I hope, as always, you enjoyed my thoughts. See you for the next one.